Tonight at 10, more details emerge about the two men who murdered a priest in a church in northern France. A video was published this evening, apparently showing the two men pledging allegiance to the Islamic State group. Yesterday's attack has brought demands for tougher security at thousands of places of worship. Pope Francis, visiting Poland, says the world is at war, but he insists religion is not the cause.
Parlo di guerra sul serio.
I'm talking about war, seriously. Not a war of religion, no. But it is a war of interests.
We'll have the latest on the Pope's intervention and on the investigation in France. Also tonight, official figures show the UK economy grew faster than expected in the months before the EU referendum. The Labour leadership contender Owen Smith apologises after saying the Prime Minister should be smashed back on her heels in a speech on tackling inequality. Hillary Clinton delights in smashing a glass ceiling, becoming the first woman to be nominated by a major party for the US presidency. And we meet one of Team GB's best medal hopes in Rio, the world champion gymnast Max Whitlock.
In the south, a culture of fear and bullying at Deep Cut was so bad it led to soldiers locking themselves in cupboards. And the quarrel over a quarry. Could this Berkshire countryside be dug up?
Good evening. More details have emerged about the two men who murdered an elderly priest in a church in northern France. Police say they're close to identifying the second attacker, having already named the first. The group calling itself Islamic State has released video footage this evening, allegedly showing the two men pledging allegiance to the IS leader. And in France, there have been calls today for improved security at thousands of places of worship. And Pope Francis said the recent attacks were proof, in his view, that the world was at war, but not a war of religion. Our correspondent Lucy Williamson has this report.
They came in rapid formation. France's elite police marking the site of its latest terror attack. Inside those walls, two teenagers had taken the congregation hostage, knifing one man and cutting the throat of his priest. Before long, the police move in. These pictures of their assault filmed by a neighbour who was woken by the noise. Someone just cried Allahu Akbar inside the church, he says. And then later, there are two people dead. As amid fears that there might be explosives, the police move someone to safety. Today, so-called Islamic State released a video it said was made by the two attackers, pledging their allegiance to the group. One of those men, Adel Kamish, was a local 19-year-old with a troubled past. Last year, he was arrested in Germany while trying to reach Syria. 2 months later, he was caught again in Turkey and sent back to France. In March this year, he was released with an electronic tag, which allowed him to leave his house between 8:30 and 12:30 every morning. In the streets where he grew up, former friends remembered him as a well-known sympathizer of IS, also known as Daesh.
He was clearly pro-Daesh. He would say it loud and clear. His family tried everything. Once his parents took him to the police station. They said, "Lock him up, he's going to commit a crime." The police said they were already monitoring him, but couldn't lock him up without a reason.
On his way to an international meeting of Catholics today, Pope Francis responded to this attack on one of his own.
For a long time, we have been saying that the world is at war. This is a war. But it's not a war of religion. No. This is a war of interests. There is a war for money, for natural resources. All the religions want peace. The others want war.
With every new target and every new location, the stakes here have grown, so that the death of a local priest in this small suburban church becomes a test of national resilience, an attack on the whole of France. In Paris, the government was left defending itself against the charge that its defence of France had failed. But was this a failure of intelligence, security or judgment, or simply the result of freedoms the country wants to protect?
Everything that can be done under the rule of law has been done. There can still be some changes, discussions. We are open to suggestions from the opposition. But you cannot protect the rule of law by rejecting rule of law.
In Notre Dame, prayers to honour Father Jacques Hamel and the hostages of Saint-Étienne. But faith in France's protectors is harder now, with the country divided over what protection means.
Let's go live to Paris tonight, and Lucy is there for us. Lucy, what is your sense of the kind of progress that's being made in this investigation now?
Well, as you said, there's nothing confirmed from the police yet about that second attacker, but there are unconfirmed reports here tonight that he may also have been flagged up to the police. It's not known how he might have been radicalised, but when it comes to the first attacker, Adel Kamish, his former friend said he'd fallen in with the wrong company, and that was also something that was known to the security services. And I think all of this points to a key question here tonight, which is how do those security services effectively monitor people who've committed no crime as yet, who are simply known to be jihadist sympathisers, when there are already more than 10,000 of them listed as potential threats to the state.
Lucy, thanks very much again. Lucy Williamson there for us, our correspondent in Paris. Now, the latest figures show that the UK economy grew in the months leading up to the vote to leave the European Union. According to the Office for National Statistics, gross domestic product grew by 0.6% in the 3 months to June. The government claimed that the figures showed that Britain was entering negotiations to leave the EU from a position of economic strength. Our economics editor, Kamal Ahmed, has more details.
Nosing ahead, the UK economy. Better figures than expected today, and an announcement by London City Airport that it was expanding. For the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, not exactly blue skies ahead, but room for cautious optimism.
The UK economy is fundamentally strong as we go into the challenge that we face ahead. That gives us the tools and the scope to respond as the economy requires.
And do you really think, as some suggested, that we could be heading for a recession?
Well, I think it's far too early to say how the economy is responding yet. Inevitably, people's reaction to a surprise is caution.
No such caution today from pharmaceutical giant GlaxoSmithKline, which announced a £275 million investment in UK production. But the maker of Night Nurse and Panadol did lace its good news with a warning. This was a company, after all, that was a firm supporter of remaining in the EU.
My guess is that we're probably going to see some choppy signals in the next 6 or 9 months. I don't think we're going to see a dramatic shift to the left or the right, but we will see some choppiness. We're going to see some things which are indicative of a bit of a slowdown, and it's likely that we're going to see some signals of early inflation.
With business investment still continuing, like here at London City Airport, some people might wonder what was all the fuss about, the economy and the referendum. I think there are two big things worth considering. Firstly, we are still largely looking in the rear view mirror. Most of the economic information published today is actually from April, when business confidence was far higher. And many senior economists I've spoken to who are very close to the government warn against a false sense of security. Britain is still facing uncertain times.
Uncertainty has been an issue for this leather company in Oxford, which has found the post-Brexit world a more difficult proposition. The weaker pound helps exporters like GSK. It's not so good for this importer.
Everything we buy is in dollars from South America. This means there's an immediate effect if the pound is very weak. So everything, since the night of Brexit, is costing us 14% more. So this has an immediate effect on our costs.
Put simply, selling purses becomes more difficult, and the figures post the referendum do suggest business confidence is falling.
Well, the data suggests that the economy was performing well ahead of the referendum vote. What we've seen since the Brexit vote is quite a significant slowdown in business sentiment, in consumer sentiment, and this will have an impact on the economy over the coming months.
Over to you, Mark Carney. Next week, the Governor of the Bank of England will announce his latest thoughts on the UK economy. The bank may even agree to cut interest rates to boost growth, a move that will only come if the economic news has indeed taken a turn for the worse. Kamal Ahmed, BBC News.
The Labour leadership candidate, Owen Smith, has apologised for saying that he'd like Labour to smash Theresa May back on her heels. He said he realised the remarks had been inappropriate. Mr Smith had been outlining his policy agenda, including the abolition of zero-hours contracts, a wealth tax on the richest and the end to private provision in the NHS in England. He was speaking in Orgreave in South Yorkshire, from where our political correspondent Vicky Young sent this report.
Owen Smith needs to make an impact, and he's only got a few weeks to do it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Owen Smith.
So today he made a direct pitch to those who last year propelled Jeremy Corbyn to the party leadership.
We need a revolution, but not some misty-eyed romantic notion of a revolution where we're going to overthrow capitalism and return to a socialist nirvana. I don't know what I'm referring to. But a cold-eyed, practical, socialist revolution.
And Mr Smith showered his audience with new policy ideas.
The public sector pay freeze would end. We would be spending an extra 4% per annum on the NHS, an equality-busting wealth tax in Britain, a £200 billion promise to borrow funds at historic low rates in order to invest in the future.
Mr Smith chose his words less carefully when he launched this attack on Theresa May.
It pained me that we didn't have the strength and the power and the vitality to smash her back on her heels and argue that these are our values.
Later, he apologised for an inappropriate choice of phrase. The task for Labour is daunting. They've lost dozens of seats in Scotland, and elsewhere, UKIP are breathing down their neck.
What would you do about UKIP voters, those who've left Labour in the north, particularly of England?
Well, I'd give them hope that there's a Labour government that gets why they're angry, that understands that they feel Britain's very unfair, that understands that they feel that some people get a fairer crack of the whip than they're getting. That's what Labour's about, bread and butter issues, building the houses we need, making sure people can afford them, simple things, but things that Labour needs to hang on to. They're our ideas, we should be delivering them.
So what do voters make of Labour's problems?
I don't like Jeremy Corbyn.
Why not?
I don't think he's good enough.
I mean, I don't know this new rules. I've heard a couple of speeches, but I don't know him yet.
Owen Smith?
Yeah, I don't know him yet. Because they put the nice suits on and they get and it's all spin.
But I'm a bit disillusioned with them at the moment. They're losing me with stuff they're coming out with. It's going in there and coming out here.
One day Owen Smith wants to be Prime Minister, but before that he has to convince Labour Party members to back him. He hopes they'll look at his long list of left-wing policies and be persuaded that he would present them far more effectively than Jeremy Corbyn.
Morning, Mr Corbyn.
But his supporters say he's been setting the agenda, not Owen Smith.
Jeremy was the person who stood alone in that at a time when it wasn't fashionable, and he started putting forward these policies. It's quite easy for people to jump on the bandwagon now because they think it's popular, but people want a politician who stands up for what they believe.
Owen Smith made his speech today on the site of a former coking plant, now a business park. He believes his vision will regenerate the Labour Party. Vicky Young, BBC News, Sheffield.
The higher rate overtime bill for hospital consultants has risen by more than a third in the past 2 years across the UK. A BBC investigation has found that one doctor in Lancashire earned an extra £375,000 over 12 months. The Department of Health says it's working to reduce overtime costs in England, as our health correspondent Dominic Hughes reports now.
Increasing demand from patients, but only a limited number of consultant doctors. Another sign of the pressures facing the health service across the UK. And it adds up to a rising wage bill for extra overtime payments to consultants. The average basic salary for a consultant is £89,000, but across the UK, extra overtime cost £168 million last year, up by a third in 2 years. One doctor made nearly £375,000 in extra payments on top of their salary in just 12 months.
Most consultants, we know, work well beyond a standard working week. They work at weekends, they work at nights. This work is even additional work beyond that. Additional work often asked for at short notice.
Some trusts are struggling to attract staff. At Lancashire teaching hospitals, where the unnamed highest earning consultant works, they've had to downgrade an A&E because of recruitment problems. To cut waiting times for operations, they're left with little choice but to offer higher rates.
Ignore the light and I just won't go through.
But just a few miles away, in Wigan, they've changed the way they work and are saving money that was previously paid to consultants to do extra shifts.
Look down for me.
Specialist nurses like Ewan now carry out procedures that once were performed by consultants. That's better for patients because they can get to see Ewan a lot more frequently, and it saves the hospital an awful lot of money.
The main benefit is that we as an organisation have less financial pressure because we're not having to pay out these premium pay rates. By working together, we can solve some pretty tricky problems, and the bottom line is it's the patients who benefit.
At present, each hospital trust can make its own arrangements on how it pays consultants for extra work, reflecting the different pressures that hospitals face.
So there are two big factors at play. The first is in planned surgical care, where often to keep within waiting times targets, consultants are having to do work at weekends and need to be paid overtime for that. The second in emergency care, where often we don't have enough consultants, is they have to end up covering for each other within their rota and then have to be paid overtime for that.
And I'll just line you up.
In England, a new contract for consultants is being negotiated, but the changes at Wigan demonstrate it is possible to cut down on expensive overtime payments. Dominic Hughes, BBC News, Wigan.
Well, for the first time in history, a woman has been nominated by a major party to be President of the United States. Democratic Party has formally backed Hillary Clinton as its candidate at its convention in Philadelphia. 23 years have passed since she first entered the White House as First Lady with her husband, President Bill Clinton. Our North America editor John Sopel has the story.
Arizona.
You felt history in the hall as the votes were cast. It's 96 years since women got the vote in the US. Jerry Emmett was 6 at the time.
And 51 votes for the next president of the United States of America, Hillary Rodham Clinton.
And now to Vermont.
Then it was the turn of Vermont, home of Senator Bernie Sanders. And in a move that delighted the Clinton camp, he called for the rules to be suspended so she'd be elected unanimously.
I move that all votes cast by delegates be reflected in the official record, and I move that Hillary Clinton be selected as the nominee of the Democratic Party for President of the United States.
The keynote speaker was an ex-president who might just become America's first man. It was vintage Bill Clinton.
Those of us who have more yesterdays than tomorrows tend to care more about our children and grandchildren. The reason you should elect her is that in the greatest country on earth, we have always been about tomorrow. Your children and grandchildren will bless you forever if you do. God bless you. Thank you.
The one advantage the Democrats have over the Republicans is glitz. Alicia Keys sang. Meryl Streep had a walk-on part. 8 years ago, Hillary Clinton famously said she'd made millions of cracks in the glass ceiling when she'd fought Barack Obama for the nomination. But now, it had shattered.
If there are any little girls out there who stayed up late to watch, let me just say, I may become the first woman president, but one of you is next. Thank you all. I can't wait to join you in Philadelphia.
Some in the hall cried with joy and relief, but the polling data shows Hillary Clinton has a lot of negatives. The glass ceiling that awaits her in November won't give way easily. very high approval ratings. So the Hillary Clinton campaign will welcome his intervention. He'll talk about the character and intellect you need to be president and will say Hillary Clinton's got that, Donald Trump hasn't. Now, Mr. Trump has caused a furore today by effectively saying the Russians should commit an act of cybersecurity and hack the emails of Hillary Clinton. You remember this convention started with a giant hack that was blamed on the Russians of the Democrats should commit an act of cybersecurity and hack the email. Chorus of condemnation led by Leon Panetta, the former CIA chief. But that blamed on the Russians of the Democratic National Committee, which was hugely embarrassing. It's brought a call.
Well, I'm sorry. Clearly a bit of a satellite issue there with the timings there with John, but apology, I think we got the gist of what he was saying. But John Sopel there at the Democratic Convention in Philadelphia. At least 40 people have been killed and more than 100 injured in a bomb attack in northeastern Syria. It happened in the predominantly Kurdish town of Kamishli, near the Turkish border. The blast was caused by a truck bomb which struck near a Kurdish security base. The group calling itself Islamic State said it was responsible. In Iraq, families are still grieving for the 292 people killed by the Islamic State group in a bomb attack in Baghdad earlier this month. The bombing of the shopping centre in the Karada district led to the highest death toll of any single attack by IS. Our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, has been back to meet some of the victims' relatives, and she sent this special report from Baghdad.
An elegy for the dead, some comfort for those who survive. This is the street where 292 Iraqis died. Once a busy shopping centre, now a makeshift shrine. Sadiq Maroof, a shopkeeper, was one of the few who made it out alive. Many in his family didn't. They pulled the window from its frame and jumped. It's now clear most died not from the bomb itself, but the terrifying fireball that followed. They were trapped inside.
There were no fire escapes. The stairs behind me were on fire. Everything was ablaze. Half of them could have survived if there had been a proper way out. Many young people would still be alive today.
We went to visit Sadiq's family. They're inconsolable. Tisa. 9. Mohammed repeats. We've lost 9 in our family. Misery upon misery for Nada, already bent by a crippling disorder. Their sons were working in the centre. Their wives and children came to shop. Only one body returned for burial. This was the scene that night. An inferno set off by a bomb, driven in by Islamic State. It tore through shops of perfume, clothing and more, all fueling the flames. And anger too. Many say their emergency services failed them. They deny that and also mourn.
I have never seen anything like it. We were ready to jump into the fire to save people. We did everything we could, but this was an overwhelming attack.
In this ruin, an extraordinary moment. A group of friends, survivors themselves, bring candles and a cake. For their friend Khalid, who died here, it would have been his birthday. Whether by accident or design, this was the worst IS attack by far, anywhere. In the grief, there's fear. There could be more to come. Lise Doucette, BBC News, Baghdad.
Let's have a brief look then at some of the day's other news stories. Detectives have released computerised images of 2 men who tried to abduct a serviceman outside RAF Marham in Norfolk last week. They said there was no credible evidence that the incident was related to terrorism, saying it may have been a case of mistaken identity. Police in Pakistan have started an investigation into claims that a British woman was murdered in a so-called honour killing. Samia Shahid from Bradford died in northern Punjab last week while visiting her family. Her husband believes she was killed because her family disapproved of their marriage. Charges have been dropped against the last 3 police officers facing trial over the death of Freddie Gray, who died in police custody in Baltimore. The 25-year-old died after he was injured in a police van last year. His death sparked protests across the US. 3 other officers have already been cleared. Now, the man chosen by the European Commission to lead its negotiations on Britain's exit from the EU is a former French Foreign Minister, Michel Barnier. He will take up his post on the 1st of October. Mr Barnier was less than popular in the City of London when he was in charge of the EU's banking reforms. Let's talk to our diplomatic correspondent, James Landale, who's with me. And what is the view, James, that he will be, well, vaguely sympathetic to British interests or not?
I think this appointment will make Brexit just that little bit harder for the United Kingdom. Michel Barnier is a veteran French politician, seasoned, tough negotiator, Brussels insider. He's been a European Commissioner twice, no less. He's somebody, who really believes in the European project, and he will take no prisoners. But as you said in the introduction, and more than that, he's also a man who's been described as the scourge of the City of London. This is a man who, when he introduced the banking reforms to the City of London in the wake of the Eurozone debt crisis, he was seen as incredibly interventionist, over-regulatory. It was hugely unpopular in the city. And I think that when so many of these negotiations for Brexit are going to be about the nitty-gritty of what financial services the UK can sell within the Eurozone, that process is going to be a lot harder as a result of this appointment. Nick Clegg, the former Deputy Prime Minister, who's now the Lib Dems Brexit spokesman, said this was the European Commission firing a shot across Britain's bows. That's one note of caution. It's still not entirely clear what role Mr Barnier will play in these negotiations. The assumption is that there will be the European member states that drive the talks and the negotiations and do the deal, but the Commission will do all the nitty-gritty and the detail. So there's a little bit of Brussels power play to be resolved there. But bottom line, when these negotiations start, probably next year, this guy will play hardball with us.
OK, James, thanks very much again. James Landale there for us. John Hinckley Jr., the man who tried to assassinate President Ronald Reagan in Washington, D.C. back in 1981, is to be released from a psychiatric hospital after 35 years. At his trial, Hinckley was found not guilty by reason of insanity, but the judge has now ruled he is now ready to live in the community. Hinckley says he wants to fit in and be a good citizen. Our correspondent Ali Makboul has more details.
It was a moment that left the world holding its breath. A gunman opened fire at close range. The president was shoved into his limo, an act that may well have saved his life, but others were left on the street, having been shot. The would-be assassin had been bundled to the ground. As Ronald Reagan was rushed through Washington, an agent with him put out the word he was fine.
Rawhide is okay.
But it was premature. Though he recovered quickly, it was found a bullet had punctured the president's lung. The attacker was John Hinckley Jr., a man obsessed with Jodie Foster, who came to believe that killing the president would impress the actress. He was found not guilty on the grounds of insanity, but was sent to a psychiatric hospital, where he's been ever since. Over recent years, though, he's been allowed on short trips home to visit his mother. A judge has now ruled he should be released to live with her. Well, among the many conditions John Hinckley's had to agree to be released, he's not allowed to come here where the shooting took place. He also can't speak to the media, he can't look himself up on the internet, and has to continue to get treatment. But in spite of all of that, there are still those who believe he shouldn't be freed. That includes the Ronald Reagan Foundation, which released a statement today saying, contrary to the judge's decision, we believe John Hinckley is still a threat to others and we strongly oppose his release.
He's a crazy man. He should be in jail for the rest of his life.
I guess you have to let him out because, he didn't actually murder anyone. He attempted murder, but then he was sick, right?
The most seriously injured among those shot in 1981 was the president's press secretary, James Brady, who was left paralyzed. He fought for legislation on gun control, though the issues surrounding guns and mental health have only intensified over the years. For Ronald Reagan, who was shot just a couple of months into his presidency, it changed the perception Americans had of him. He was now a hero who cheated death. And 35 years after he almost radically changed the course of world history, John Hinckley could be sent home within a week. Aleem Maqbool, BBC News in Washington.
There's just over a week to go to the start of the Olympic Games in Rio, where Team GB are looking to win 48 medals. One of the squad's best hopes is 23-year-old Max Whitlock, the world champion gymnast, who was just a teenager when he unexpectedly won team and individual bronze at London 2012. Since then, he's struggled a bit with illness, but he's also won a range of other medals. He met Catherine Downs at his training base in Essex.
Focus. That's what strikes you when you meet Max Whitlock. Since bronze in London, he spent the last 4 years working to make it gold this time round.
I was an underdog going in there. I was only 19 years old, unexpected to produce any results. I mean, helped with the team result, and that was the first time we'd done in 100 years. And then for me to get an individual bronze medal, I was so pleased with my achievement and what I produced on that day.
While his friend and rival silver medalist Lewis Smith became a household name after London, for Max it was straight back to the gym. The pair will go head-to-head again in Rio.
At the end of the day, that's pushing both of us even more, which is the best thing for our team. The highest scores we have on those individual apparatus, the better score that we can hopefully come out with as a team. So, you know, it's healthy competition.
While the rivalry might be healthy, Max himself has been anything but. Glandular fever laid him low for 3 months last year, but through sheer grit, he fought back to become the first British man to win World Championship gold.
Makes the pirouette! What a super challenge!
So how many times a day are you here?
6 days a week, 5 to 7 hours training a day. So we usually do 2 sessions with a lunch break in between.
And this is your specialism. You've mastered this, haven't you?
Well, this is my strongest piece, yes, definitely. And it's the piece that, you know, a lot of my focus is on all the time. I do double sessions on the pommel horse every day. I sort of use that as a lot of motivation to push me even harder to get to the highest level I possibly could.
What's it like going into an Olympic Games as reigning world champion?
It calms me knowing that I've got that title behind me. You know, some people can see it as a lot more pressure, but I see that as a result that I've got in my bag now. I need to move forward. I need to go in and produce the best scores that I possibly can, and I'm doing my best to do that.
And with that, it's back to training, back to work. Catherine Downs, BBC News.
Quick reminder that Newsnight's on BBC Two, and here's Kirsty.
Tonight, the President of the EU isn't hanging around. He's appointed a former French Foreign Minister to lead their Brexit negotiations. So just how much hardball is he likely to play? Join me now on BBC Two.
Newsnight with Kirsty, and here on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.